Hello again, everyone. This lecture is all about creativity and the pursuit of wisdom. I'd like to put those two things together. I think it's very important to talk about creativity alongside of, as a part of, the pursuit of wisdom. I would say that you can't really understand what creativity really is without being concerned with what wisdom is, and loving wisdom, seeking it. Anyway, in Taoist philosophy and Zen painting, true creativity only arises when the self is absent, where there is no painter who paints, when the emptiness of self is understood and the illusion of self is transcended in wisdom. Kind of a different understanding of what it means to be creative, right? There's no one there who actually does the creation. You guys probably, in your B.Ed programs, have seen and heard Sir Ken Robinson many times. He's a very popular figure in education these days. Probably in your first year courses in the Bachelor of Education, you've sat through many TED Talks by Sir Ken. Sir Ken, I've seen him at different teachers' conventions. I've heard him talk. And his big thing, as you're aware of, is creativity. He just talks about creativity. He's become kind of like the go person for creativity. What is creativity in schools? So I'm not going to talk like Sir Ken about creativity. I think that there are deep, fundamental problems with Sir Ken's understanding of what creativity is. Every time I've heard him talk at the teachers' conventions or online with all of his doodling and the rest of it, I personally am left with more questions and concerns about the meaning of creativity than Sir Ken clears up for me. So hopefully this will help you think about things a little bit differently as well. So, we should start off then with what is creativity? And, you having clicked on at least this lecture, what are your interests in creativity? I think probably most teachers are interested in creativity and having creative students and allowing students to be creative. But what does that mean anyway? Certainly creativity is held to be a great good in education for both students and teachers. At the same time, we can all admit that creativity is not an unmitigated good. I think that's maybe what Sir Ken overlooks. It's one of those things, I guess, that kind of makes me wonder about what he's saying, right? If we look around ourselves or to history, we can readily see how human creativity doesn't always bear precious fruit. Indeed, the great good of creativity is, in no small part, responsible for immense environmental degradation. So all that pollution up in the air, all the computers that we make and all the rubbish that we make in our part of the world, and we send it over as e-waste to other parts of the world and let them deal with it. And it can be really, really unpleasant, all this creativity we have, right? Devastating nuclear weapons. That was a pretty creative invention, but not perhaps the best idea, right? Lying propaganda machines. Creative stories about how Jews rule the world and how there's a Jewish conspiracy and all this other rubbish. These things are creative. And creative Wall Street accounting, right? A few years ago with Enron and the rest of these people. That's a sort of creativity that I don't know what Ken would say about. And then there's Steve Jobs, right? He's the poster boy for creativity. I don't know about you, but sitting in front of a computer or with computer technology, yep, it's pretty convenient, but oh my gosh, my hand? I've got terrible carpal tunnel in my one hand, and it's my back. I've noticed sitting at these machines. There are problems here, folks. creative technologies that we've invented, I guess. However, our simple acknowledgement of this fact does not mean that creativity is something to be spurned or discouraged in education. Rather, it suggests that in order for the great good of creativity to be of benefit to ourselves and to the world, it must be grounded in the genuine pursuit of wisdom. For wisdom is the only unmitigated good. Indeed, without wisdom, our pursuit and our enjoyment of all other goods, creativity included, invariably ends in folly and contributes to greater suffering. I guess that's my problem with Ken. I just don't feel like anything that he says ever amounts to anything that addresses that deep, fundamental problem. Just kind of sidesteps it, right? So what I'd like to do with you in these lectures is do it's like a recovery operation, finding the old Rosetta Stone there. Looking back, remembering, recollecting what the ancients, what medieval peoples have said about creativity, what they have said, if they've said anything about creativity, but what they've said about wisdom and why wisdom is so important and why without it, doesn't matter how creative you are. Right? So I'd like us to re-examine our own interests and aspirations about fostering creativity in light of some of the ancient or forgotten notions about creativity. So, just doing a little bit of etymological work, right? You can grab a copy of the big Oxford English Dictionary and just look this stuff up for yourself. It's not hard. Or I guess you can do it online now, right? But initially, most of the words we have to do with creativity, they entered the English language from Latin in the Middle Ages. Actually, in the late Middle Ages. Creativity comes from the Latin word creo, which means to create or make. You see the word creator there. The word creator started appearing around 1300. Just meant a supreme being, right? So it wasn't a word that we used for people. We used it for God, the supreme being. Créature, from the French, 12th century. Creator, author, creatus, not generally capitalized until King James Bible, right? So these were all, this word was always some kind of an epithet to or for God, all right? And then we get, from that, the late 13th century, you get creature, right? So anything created by the creator or any living being. And this comes from, again, modern French. Then, late 14th century, you get the word creation. And this is the action of creating or a created thing. It's from French again. Creation comes something that comes into being, creating, producing. It's all related to that. But it means that which God, again, it's always related back to God. It's always some kind of a divine thing, right? Meaning that which God has created, the world and all that's in it. This is from the 1610s. And it has to do with costumes, desserts, and these sorts of things enter in from the 1870s from the French. So, you start to see creation science. That is a word that you start to see attested in 1970s. So, I don't know, or 1670s. I think that's upside down. Then create is a late 14th century word from Latin, creare, to make, bring forth, produce, beget, related to crescere, arise or grow. We've got creative in the 1670s. But then that word that Ken uses, creativity, it's so new. It doesn't even really appear until 1859, says the dictionary anyway. And it's that creative power or faculty, that ability to create. So just before that, you get Wordsworth, people like this talking about the word creative, using the word creative to mean in literature, imaginative, right? So there's where it looks like it starts to really become associated with humans and human capacities around 1816, right? But you can see that basically right since, the 1300s, it was always to do with God or the divine in some fashion, and then only really in the 1800s does it start to really become associated with human activity. So the original sense of words related to create and creativity suggests that creation is always a divine activity. It's something that only a God or God does. Creation in this way is ex nihilo, that is, it occurs when something is made from nothing. Words like creative and creativity only start to be used to describe human activities after the Enlightenment, beginning around 1650 to 1700, and continuing throughout the 18th century. Whereas the Latin roots of our language point to creativity as a divine activity in which human beings might participate, the foundations of our language in Greek experience do not speak of human beings as creators. The Greeks instead spoke of themselves as makers, poets, from poieo, to make, or poiesis, meaning poetry. And the Greek poets, experienced their acts of making, or poiesis, as a kind of inspiration from the beyond, most typically by the muses, from where our word music's derived. Indeed, the Greek word for experience, or pathos, has simultaneous meanings of suffering and necessarily implies passivity in a way that creation as activity does not, right? So, passivity versus activity. Poetry, as understood by the Greeks, is always the product of one suffering from divine madness or mania. Well, what does the etymology of words like creativity, making, and poetry teach us about the ancient and deep root meaning of our experiences of such things? Why do we enjoy and praise creativity? These are important questions. I don't know what Ken has to say about them necessarily. I think he sidesteps them largely. Such study suggests that creativity and the capacity for making among human beings is something divine. That is, when we're being creative, we participate in what is highest in our nature, perhaps something that even transcends our nature, inasmuch as we are mortal beings. That is, beings destined to die, who might engage in what is an immortal or divine characteristic. Right? So creativity in human beings has something to do with whatever it is that's the immortal bit in us, or some kind of a divine thing within the human. So, as a summary then, what is creativity? You look at it from a modern perspective, or you can look at it from various ancient perspectives. From a modern view, or modern views, it's the faculty whereby a person innovates, or invents, or creates something new that has some kind of value. For example, like a product or a solution, maybe a work of art, a novel, or a joke. Creativity involves imagination, individual self-expression, transcending what is currently thought or done. It's spontaneous activity. That's generally, when we speak about creativity, that's what we mean today, right? Ancient views are a bit different, though. They're associated with our participation in extrahuman or divine powers, right? Creativity, from the ancient sense, has to do with bringing something into existence from nothing, ex nihilo. Or, as making, it has to do with devising something new from what's already present, right? So that's more like the Greek idea, right? An activity rooted in deep passivity. Not activity, but passivity, right? It has to do with the gods affecting you. You're inspired, right? Something filling you. Suffering. Being affected by what we see and giving voice or articulation to what we see. So that's more what the ancients would consider associated with this. So stating the problem for schools and for us, because this is a course, after all, devoted to Bachelor of Education students, we recognize creativity as a good, and we want children to express and develop their creativity, right? That's what Calvin there would like, I'm sure. Whereas school often feels boring or unengaging for children. Being creative feels good and is rewarding, right? We can seek to foster creativity in school. And yet, we also know that our creativity isn't an unmitigated good. We've already gone through that. We can and do create terrible problems and suffering in the world through our creativity. Sorry, Ken. So, I'm going to speak about one needful thing here. Awareness of this problem with creativity isn't simply a modern realization. The ancients, too, were critical of the creations or makings of the poets, inasmuch as their musings were not the result of their own knowing of what is, rather their makings came to them from beyond themselves in a way that even they themselves didn't understand. You know, when Plato complains about the poets, this is his main complaint. Plato's a poet, right? But when he's thinking about poetic inspiration, this is one of the things he says about it. The ancients saw that the makings of the poets were therefore of ambiguous value, and that the truths they contained were intertwined with ignorance and confusion. Sorry, Ken. The ancients treasured their poets as the inspired ones who gave articulation to their most important stories, right? The poets were essentially the educators. They were the teachers and the educators of the ancient world, ladies and gentlemen. They made the stories, or the mythoi, where we get our word myth, right? And yet, with the rise of philosophy, they came to see that such makings were not enough. It became important, therefore, to scrutinize the myths, to take them up in search of wisdom, or Sophia. Well, in modern times, we focus so much on making and creating and innovating in order to be competitive. We see innovation as absolutely essential to our future prosperity and happiness. And we suppose that we can innovate ourselves out of any problem that we create as we go along, right? A way to solve your problems of your creativity, or that you've created for yourself, is just more creativity, more innovation, right? But the facts remain the same since ancient times. None of our innovations will be truly good if they're not informed by wisdom. The pursuit of wisdom, therefore, ought to take priority over everything else we do. Sorry, Ken. Anyway, this is basically a call to pursue wisdom in school as the only way to ensure that our creativity is indeed an expression of what is highest in ourselves. So here I'd like to quote Socrates to you. He's on trial in this passage for his life. He's been condemned by all the parents. Parents have come to hate him. They think that he's ruining their children, with this teaching. He says he's never taught anybody, but they say you've wrecked our kids. And now he's defending himself. And here's what he says: "I, men of Athens, salute you, and I love you. But I will obey the god rather than you. And as long as I breathe and am able to do so, I will certainly not stop loving wisdom. And I will exhort you and explain this to you, to whomever of you I happen to meet. And I will speak just the sorts of things I'm accustomed to. Best of men, you are an Athenian from the city that is the greatest and best reputed for wisdom and strength. Are you not ashamed that you care for having as much money as possible, and reputation, and honor, and here I'd put in creativity, but that you neither care for nor give thought to prudence and truth, and how your soul will be the best possible? But then, if the great good of creativity can only be realized through the pursuit of wisdom, we must ask the questions, what is wisdom? What does it mean to pursue wisdom? Is wisdom too lofty a good for children and teachers to pursue? And what might the pursuit of wisdom look like in an educational setting? Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about our manner of investigating the relation between creativity and wisdom's pursuit in education. How do you marry these two things up? Because if you're going to talk about creativity, you can't just do it on its own and think, wow, that was an awesome TED Talk. I talked about creativity. Everybody's so hyped on creativity because they already want everything in the world and they want to be successful. It's just basically playing to people's cravings, right? Forget about that. How do we think more intelligently about creativity when we align it with wisdom's pursuit? Well, this course investigates the meaning of creativity as a good in light of the vital need to pursue wisdom in education. Students in this course will be challenged to investigate some of the most deeply held assumptions about the nature of wisdom. Contemporary and modern ideas about wisdom will be evaluated in light of ancient and medieval philosophic and religious understandings of wisdom and wisdom's pursuit. Theoretical understandings of wisdom and its pursuit will then be complemented and enriched by, as well as grounded in, exposure to what the pursuit of wisdom and education might look like in a practical school setting. And we're going to do this through examining two strands of wisdom-seeking pedagogy. Classically, the pursuit of wisdom has taken two basic forms in the Eastern and Western traditions. Philosophy, or the love of wisdom, on the one hand, and the meditative practices of the world's various contemplative or wisdom traditions on the other. And to varying degrees, both philosophic studies and meditative practices have already entered into a number of our primary, secondary, and post-secondary schools. In addition, there's much scholarly research to suggest that philosophy in the classroom, as well as contemplative education, have positive effects on student creativity. This series of lectures will introduce students to each of these wisdom-seeking pedagogies as important and creative educational developments. Real-life examples of such pedagogy at work in the classroom will be investigated, and we will discuss ideas about how wisdom-seeking might be incorporated into our own teaching efforts. In addition, students themselves will be given the opportunity to participate in a variety of such wisdom-seeking pedagogical practices throughout the duration of this course. It's hoped that exposure to this course, its questions and perplexities, and its focus upon wisdom will be helpful for all teacher practitioners who wish to engage creatively in their own classrooms as lovers of wisdom, and that they, in turn, might find its contents helpful as signposts on their individual teaching journeys to inspire such creativity among their own students as well.